I'm Sienna Hayes, 24, and my family just told me that choosing plastic surgery over cardiology was like choosing to sell hot dogs instead of performing brain surgery. My father looked at me across our mahogany dining table, like I'd announced I was dropping out to become a circus performer. The disappointment in his eyes wasn't new, but the public nature of his disapproval was. Plastic surgery, Sienna? Really? Dr. Robert Hayes, renowned cardiologist, set down his wine glass with the kind of precision he used in the operating room. After everything this family has built, my mother, Dr. Patricia Hayes, neurologist and published researcher, didn't even look up from her salmon. It's cosmetic, dear. Hardly real medicine. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt judged by your own family. You'll definitely want to stick around for what happened next. Let me paint you a picture of the Hayes family dynasty. My father has performed over 3,000 cardiac surgeries, saved countless lives, and has his name on a wing of St. Mary's Hospital. My mother lectures at Harvard Medical School and has authored papers that other neurologists quote like scripture. Then there's my older brother Marcus, following Dad's footsteps in cardiology, though his version involves showing up late to rounds and treating nurses like personal assistants. The Hayes name carries weight in Boston medical circles. When people hear it, they think excellence, dedication, life-saving procedures. They don't think about nose jobs and breast augmentations, which is exactly how my parents view plastic surgery. Sienna, my father continued, cutting his steak with surgical precision, plastic surgery is vanity medicine. It's about making money off people's insecurities, not saving lives. I'd prepared for this conversation for months, knowing it would come eventually. Dad, reconstructive surgery helps burn victims, accident survivors, children born with cleft palates. Oh, please, Marcus interrupted, not looking up from his phone. You're not going into reconstructive surgery and we all know it. You want to do boob jobs in Beverly Hills because it's easier money. The assumption stung because it was so typical of my family's inability to see beyond their own narrow definition of worthy medicine. They'd already decided my motivations without asking about my actual plans or interests. I'm interested in all aspects of plastic surgery, I said evenly, including reconstructive work, trauma reconstruction, and yes, cosmetic procedures that help people feel confident about themselves. My mother finally looked up. Confident about themselves? Sienna, that's not medicine. That's therapy with a scalpel. The way she said it, like I was planning to open a crystal healing shop instead of a legitimate medical practice, told me everything I needed to know about how this conversation would end. I've already been accepted into the plastic surgery residency program at Mass General, I announced. I start in July. The silence that followed was deafening. My father's fork paused halfway to his mouth. My mother's expression shifted from dismissive to genuinely shocked. Without discussing it with us first? She asked. I'm 24, Mom. I don't need permission to choose my medical specialty. Marcus laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. Good luck paying for that residency on your own, sis. Mom and Dad aren't funding your vanity project. And there it was, the financial threat I'd been expecting. Marcus is right, my father said, setting down his fork entirely. We've invested heavily in your medical education up to this point. But if you insist on pursuing this path, you'll do it without our financial support. I looked around the table at my family, these people who were supposed to support my dreams, and felt something shift inside me. It wasn't anger exactly, more like clarity. I understand, I said quietly. My father seemed surprised by my calm acceptance. He'd probably expected tears, begging, or a dramatic change of heart. Sienna, my mother's voice softened slightly. We're not trying to punish you. We're trying to guide you toward a meaningful career, one worthy of the Hayes name, as if I was somehow diminishing it by wanting to help people feel better about themselves in a different way than they did. I'll make my own way, I said, standing up from the table, and I'll make my own name. As I walked toward the door, I heard Marcus mutter, "This should be entertaining to watch." If only he knew how right he was. The first thing you learn about working 3 jobs while completing a plastic surgery residency is that coffee becomes a food group. By my second month, I was running on 4 hours of sleep and pure determination. My parents' financial cutoff had been swift and absolute. No more rent money, no more car payments, no more family credit card for emergencies. Marcus, meanwhile, had just asked Dad for $20,000 to buy a new BMW, and gotten it, because apparently supporting the golden child's lifestyle was an investment, while funding my education was throwing money away. I picked up shifts at 2 different private hospitals and started working weekends at a cosmetic dermatology clinic. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was making decent money doing exactly what my family considered beneath us, while Marcus borrowed money monthly to maintain his image as a successful young cardiologist. "Sienna, you look exhausted," Dr. Williams, my residency supervisor, commented after I nearly fell asleep during a consultation. Everything okay at home? Home. That was a generous term for the studio apartment I'd rented in a questionable neighborhood because it was all I could afford after my parents cut me off. The heat barely worked. The neighbors upstairs seemed to enjoy rearranging furniture at 3 a.m., and the kitchen was so small I could touch both walls while standing in the center. But it was mine. Every square foot paid for with money I'd earned myself. Just adjusting to the schedule, I told Dr. Williams, which was partially true. The schedule was brutal. Monday through Friday, I was in residency from 6 a.m. until whenever our last surgery finished. Weekends, I worked 12-hour shifts at Boston Presbyterian, where wealthy clients came for discretionary procedures. I'd get home Sunday night so tired I'd sleep in my scrubs, then start over Monday morning. The financial pressure was constant and crushing. Medical school loans, rent, utilities, groceries, gas money, and the 1,000 small expenses that add up when you don't have family money as a safety net. Some nights, I'd lie in my narrow bed doing mental math, calculating how many weekend shifts I'd need to pick up to make rent. My relationship with my family during this time could be summarized as polite distance. They'd call occasionally, asking how I was doing, but the conversations always felt like they were waiting for me to admit defeat and switch specialties. Sienna, we had dinner with the Richardsons last night, my mother mentioned during one of our weekly check-ins. Their son James is doing his cardiology fellowship at Johns Hopkins. Such a bright future ahead of him. The subtext was always there. Look what you could have been if you'd made better choices. Marcus surprisingly called me one Thursday evening while I was studying for boards between shifts. "How's the glamorous world of plastic surgery?" he asked, and I could hear the smirk in his voice. "Exhausting," I answered honestly. "You know, you could always change specialties. There's no shame in admitting you bit off more than you could chew financially." This from the man who'd called Dad earlier that week, asking for money to cover his portion of a weekend trip to Martha's Vineyard with his medical school friends. "I'm managing fine, Marcus. Thanks for the concern. I'm just saying, if you ever want to switch to internal medicine or family practice, something more sustainable, I could put in a word with some people." The condescension was breathtaking. He genuinely believed I was failing and would eventually need his help to salvage my career. "I appreciate that, but I'm committed to plastic surgery." "Your funeral," he said, and hung up. By my 6th month, something interesting started happening. The long hours, the financial pressure, and the constant doubt from my family had turned me into someone sharper, more focused. I wasn't just learning plastic surgery techniques, I was learning business, networking, and most importantly, self-reliance. The patients at the weekend clinic started requesting me specifically, not because I was more skilled than the other residents, we were all learning, but because I listened to them differently. I understood what it felt like to want something better for yourself and be willing to sacrifice everything to get it. "You have good instincts with patients," Dr. Chen, the clinic owner, told me after a particularly successful consultation with a nervous first-time client. "You make them feel heard, not judged." Maybe it was because I knew what judgment felt like. One evening, after a particularly long shift, I sat in my car in the hospital parking garage and called my parents. I'd just assisted in a reconstruction surgery for a car accident victim, rebuilding a shattered cheekbone that would allow a 19-year-old girl to smile again without covering her face. "Hi, Dad. How are you?" "Sienna, good to hear from you. How's the work going?" "Good. I assisted in an amazing reconstruction today. This girl had been in a terrible accident and we were able to—" "That's nice, dear. Marcus had some exciting news. Tell her, Marcus." My brother's voice came through the speaker. "I just got selected for the Advanced Cardiac Fellowship at Mass General. Full scholarship, stipend, the works." "That's wonderful. Marcus, congratulations." "Thanks. Dad's throwing a party next weekend to celebrate. You should come. Assuming you can get time off from your thing, my thing. The career I was working 80-hour weeks to build while he enjoyed family-funded celebrations for achievements handed to him through connections. "I'll try to make it," I lied, knowing I'd be working. After I hung up, I sat in that parking garage and made a decision that would change everything. I was going to open my own practice. Not in 5 years, not after I'd established myself, but as soon as I finished residency. And I was going to prove to all of them that they'd been wrong about everything. Planning to open your own plastic surgery practice while completing residency and working multiple jobs is either ambitious or insane. I chose to call it ambitious, though my bank account frequently suggested otherwise. I spent my lunch breaks researching locations, my commute time listening to business podcasts, and my scarce free evenings teaching myself about medical practice management. YouTube University became my business school, and coffee shop Wi-Fi became my office. "You're opening a practice straight out of residency?" Dr. Rodriguez, one of my weekend clinic mentors, asked when I mentioned my plans. That's aggressive. I prefer focused, I replied, which was my polite way of saying I didn't have a choice. Without family financial backing, without connections to established practices wanting to bring on junior partners, I needed to create my own opportunities. The research phase was eye-opening. Medical real estate in Boston was astronomical. Medical equipment loans required massive down payments, and malpractice insurance for a new practice was essentially financial suicide. But I'd learned something valuable during my months of financial independence. When you can't afford the conventional path, you get creative. I found a small space in an up-and-coming neighborhood outside the traditional medical district. The rent was a third of what comparable spaces cost downtown, but it needed significant renovation. The previous tenant had been a dentist who'd apparently last updated his office sometime in the 1980s. It has good bones, the realtor said optimistically as we stood in the space that smelled like old dental adhesive and broken dreams. It has bones, I agreed. Whether they're good remains to be seen. I started spending my Sunday mornings there, measuring spaces, researching contractors, and trying to envision how to transform this dated dental office into a modern plastic surgery clinic. The numbers were daunting, but not impossible if I could do some of the work myself and find the right financing. My family's reaction to my practice plans was exactly what I expected. Sienna, opening a practice requires significant capital, my father explained during our monthly dinner, which I'd been attending less frequently due to my schedule. Business loans, equipment costs, staff salaries, insurance, these aren't small numbers. I've been researching the numbers for months, Dad. I know what I'm looking at. Marcus laughed. Research? Sienna, there's a difference between Googling how to start a medical practice and actually understanding business finance. This coming from someone who'd never paid his own rent, let alone run a business. I'm working with a business advisor, I said calmly, and I've been approved for a small business loan. The loan approval had taken 6 months of applications, rejections, and reapplications. The interest rate was higher than I wanted, but it was enough to cover the essential equipment and first year's operating expenses if I managed everything carefully. My mother set down her wine glass. Darling, we're not trying to discourage you. We're trying to be realistic. Starting a practice requires experience, connections, established patient referrals, things that take time to develop. Or family connections, I added quietly. The comment hung in the air for a moment. My father's expression sharpened. If you're implying that Marcus's success is solely due to family connections, I'm not implying anything. I'm stating that Marcus has advantages I don't, and I've accepted that I need to create my own path. You could have those same advantages if you'd chosen a respectable specialty, Marcus said. Dad has connections throughout the cardiology and internal medicine departments. He could have opened doors for you. Could have. Past tense. The doors that would always remain closed because I'd chosen the wrong kind of medicine. I appreciate that, but I want to succeed or fail on my own merit. My mother sighed. Sienna, pride is expensive. Why make things harder for yourself than they need to be? Because easy success that came with strings attached wasn't actually success at all, though I didn't say that out loud. Instead, I started attending every medical conference and networking event I could afford. I volunteered for charity cases that established practices didn't want to take on. I assisted senior surgeons on weekends in exchange for learning advanced techniques. I was building connections the hard way, one relationship at a time. The renovation process became my second education. I learned about permits, contractors, medical equipment financing, and the 17 different types of insurance required for a surgical practice. I spent evenings after long shifts, choosing everything from floor plans to paint colors to the specific chairs for the waiting room. Every decision was calculated. I couldn't afford mistakes or changes of mind. The budget was tight enough that overspending on one area meant cutting corners somewhere else. Why are you doing this to yourself? My roommate from residency asked when she found me assembling furniture in my apartment at midnight. You could join an established practice, get a steady salary, and have normal hours. Because I want to build something that's completely mine, I said, struggling with an instruction manual written in what appeared to be 3 languages, none of them helpful. She shook her head. You're crazy. Maybe I was. But I was crazy with a plan, which felt better than being sane with someone else's expectations. By month 10 of residency, I had a signed lease, architectural plans, contractor estimates, and a timeline that would allow me to open 6 months after graduation. I also had stress-induced insomnia, a coffee addiction that was concerning medical professionals, and a checking account balance that made me nauseous. But I also had something I'd never experienced before: complete ownership of my choices and their consequences. The night I signed the final papers for the clinic space, I sat in my car outside the building and called no one. There was no one to share the moment with who would understand what it meant or what it had cost. And that was perfectly fine with me. Construction noise at 7 a.m. when you've worked until 2 a.m. becomes a special kind of torture. I learned to sleep with earplugs and white noise, because the clinic renovation was happening whether my residency schedule accommodated it or not. Managing a construction project while completing surgical training required superhuman organization skills I didn't know I possessed. I'd get updates from contractors during 5-minute breaks between surgeries, approve material changes via text while scrubbing in, and review electrical plans during lunch when I remembered to eat lunch. "Dr. Hayes, you seem distracted lately," Dr. Williams commented after I'd asked him to repeat post-operative instructions twice in one morning. "Just a lot going on outside of residency, sir." "Personal issues?" I almost laughed. "If you considered opening a medical practice during your final months of training a personal issue, then yes. Nothing that affects my work performance," I assured him, which was technically true. My exhaustion affected my work performance, but that was from trying to do 2 full-time jobs simultaneously. The clinic was slowly transforming from abandoned dental office to something that resembled my vision. New flooring, updated lighting, a complete electrical overhaul, and modern plumbing had already consumed most of my budget before we even addressed medical equipment. "Your contractor is here again," the residency coordinator mentioned as I passed her desk. "He says it's urgent." Mike, my contractor, had become familiar with hospital protocols out of necessity. He'd learned to navigate medical schedules and find me between surgeries when problems arose that couldn't wait for evening phone calls. "Doc, we've got a problem with the HVAC system," he said without preamble. "The unit is older than we thought. It won't handle the ventilation requirements for a surgical suite. The replacement cost was 3 times the original estimate and would delay opening by at least 6 weeks. I stood in the hospital corridor doing mental math while residents, nurses, and patients flowed around us. "What are my options? Replace it now or replace it later when it fails inspection. Either way, you need a new system for your surgical suite to be licensed." The financial hit meant cutting other planned improvements and stretching my loan to its absolute limit. But without proper ventilation, there would be no surgical suite, which meant no practice. "Order the new system," I said, feeling my carefully planned budget dissolve. "You sure? That's a big chunk of change." "I'm sure." What I was actually sure about was that I'd committed too much to turn back now. The lease was signed, the contractors were hired, and my residency ended in 3 months. Failure wasn't an option. That evening, I sat in the unfinished clinic space surrounded by construction dust and equipment boxes, updating my financial projections. The numbers were tighter than I'd planned, but still workable if everything went according to schedule and nothing else went wrong. 2 weeks later, something else went wrong. The city inspector found an issue with the electrical panel, Mike informed me during my lunch break. "It needs to be completely rewired to meet current medical facility codes." Another unexpected expense. Another delay. Another evening spent revising budgets and extending loan applications. "How much longer?" I asked, walking through the space that still looked more like a construction site than a medical facility. 8 weeks, maybe 10 if we don't hit any more surprises. 10 weeks would put opening right at my graduation date, assuming no more surprises. In construction, assuming no surprises was like assuming it wouldn't rain during a Boston winter. My family's reaction to my construction updates during our monthly dinners was predictable. These sorts of cost overruns are exactly why opening a practice requires experience, my father said when I mentioned the HVAC replacement. "Business planning isn't just about estimating costs. It's about planning for contingencies." "I'm handling the contingencies as they arise," I replied. "By borrowing more money, by problem solving and adjusting plans as needed." Marcus looked up from his phone. "How much debt are you taking on for this place?" The question was clearly intended to demonstrate the recklessness of my financial decisions, but I'd actually done my homework on debt-to-income ratios for new medical practices. "Within normal parameters for practice startups," I answered. "Normal for practices opened by experienced doctors with established patient bases," my mother added. "Not for residents with no track record." Their concerns weren't entirely wrong, which made them more frustrating than if they'd been completely off base. I was taking financial risks that would have been easier to manage with family backing or established connections. But I'd learned something during months of handling problems on my own. Every challenge I solved myself made me more confident about solving the next one. Every decision I made without family input proved I could trust my own judgment. "Have you thought about partners?" my father asked. "Bringing in an established doctor to share costs and provide mentorship?" "I've considered it, but I want to maintain creative control over how the practice operates." "Creative control over a medical practice?" Marcus laughed. "Sienna, it's not an art project, it's a business. It's a business that reflects my values and approach to patient care. Partnership would mean compromising on those things. My mother shook her head. Stubbornness is not a business strategy. Maybe not, but it had gotten me this far. 3 weeks before my residency graduation, I stood in what would soon be my reception area and made a decision that felt both terrifying and inevitable. I was going to invite my family to the clinic's grand opening, not because I expected them to come, but because I wanted them to have the opportunity to see what I'd built without their support or approval. I wrote the invitations by hand on elegant stationery I'd splurged on despite the tight budget. Simple, professional announcements that included the clinic address, opening date, and a brief description of services offered. I addressed one to Dr. and Mrs. Robert Hayes and another to Dr. Marcus Hayes, then sealed them before I could change my mind. If they chose to attend, they'd see that their predictions about my inevitable failure had been wrong. If they chose not to attend, I'd have my answer about where I stood with my family. Either way, I was ready. The morning of my clinic's grand opening, I stood in the completed reception area at 6 a.m., checking every detail one final time. The space had been transformed into something that exceeded my original vision. Warm lighting, comfortable seating, original artwork from local artists, and an atmosphere that felt welcoming rather than clinical. I'd sent the invitations to my family 2 weeks earlier with a simple handwritten note. I'd love to share this milestone with you. Opening ceremony at 2 p.m., followed by tours and light refreshments. My phone had been silent since then. No RSVPs, no questions about the event, no acknowledgement that the invitations had been received. But I'd told myself that didn't necessarily mean they wouldn't come. Maybe they wanted to surprise me. By 1:30 p.m., guests started arriving. Dr. Rodriguez from the weekend clinic, several nurses I'd worked with during residency, my contractor Mike and his wife, the realtor who'd helped me find the space, and about 20 other people who'd supported my journey in various ways. At 2 p.m., I stood at the front of my new reception area and realized my family wasn't coming. I scanned the room one final time, hoping to see familiar faces walking through the door. But there were only the people who'd believed in me when it mattered. "Thank you all for being here," I began, my voice steadier than I felt. 2 years ago, this was just an idea that most people thought was impossible. Today, it's real because of the support from people like you who helped make it happen. The speech I'd prepared had included thanks to my family. I skipped that section. After the formal opening, guests toured the facility while I answered questions about services and appointment scheduling. The positive response was overwhelming. Several people booked consultations on the spot, and Dr. Rodriguez mentioned referring appropriate cases my way. "This is impressive." "Sienna," said Janet, one of the nurses from residency, "you should be really proud of what you've accomplished." I was proud, but there was an empty feeling where family celebration should have been. At 5 p.m., after the last guests left, I sat alone in my new office and checked my phone. 3 text messages, none from family members. Then I opened the family group chat I'd been avoiding for weeks. The messages were from 3 hours ago, right around the time my opening ceremony was happening. "Dad, Sienna's little clinic opens today. Glad we're not associating ourselves with what's bound to be an inevitable failure. Marcus." "Agreed. Plastic surgery is embarrassing enough without having the Hayes name attached to it." "Mom, I just hope she doesn't expect us to refer patients when it doesn't work out." The conversation continued for several more messages, each one dismissing my practice as a vanity project that would fail within a year. They'd spent my opening day actively hoping for my failure and making sure other family members knew they wanted no association with my embarrassing career choice. I read every message twice, then quietly left the group chat. I didn't send an angry response. I didn't defend my choices or correct their assumptions. I just removed myself from the conversation entirely. The silence in my clinic felt different after reading those messages. Not lonely exactly, but clarifying. These were people who'd rather see me fail than succeed in a way they didn't approve of. I locked up the clinic and drove home to my small apartment, where I ordered Chinese takeout and opened a bottle of wine I'd been saving for this celebration. I ate dinner alone, but not sadly. There was something liberating about being completely honest about where I stood with my family. No more wondering if they secretly supported me. No more hoping they'd come around when they saw my success. No more pretending their approval mattered to my actual happiness. I raised my wine glass to the empty apartment. To building something they said was impossible, I said out loud, and doing it without people who never believed in it anyway. The next morning, my first official day of practice, I arrived at 7 a.m. to find a dozen beautiful flower arrangements outside my door. Cards from colleagues, vendors, and new friends congratulating me on the opening. Not one arrangement was from family. I carried them inside and arranged them throughout the reception area and consultation rooms. The clinic looked even more welcoming with the addition of flowers, and I realized this was exactly what a fresh start was supposed to feel like. My first patient was scheduled for 9 a.m., a consultation for a breast reduction that would improve both her physical comfort and self-confidence. Real medicine that would improve someone's quality of life, regardless of what my family thought about the worthiness of plastic surgery. As I prepared for the consultation, I caught myself in the mirror and smiled. I looked like someone who belonged in her own practice, someone who'd earned the right to make medical decisions that mattered to her patients. The woman in the mirror didn't need family approval to know she was doing meaningful work, and that realization felt better than any congratulations message would have. 6 months into running my own practice, the loneliness had evolved into something more like peaceful focus. My days were structured around consultations, surgeries, and the business aspects of running a medical practice that no one had taught me in medical school. The patient load was growing steadily through word-of-mouth referrals and genuine satisfaction with results. I'd performed everything from reconstructive surgery for accident victims to cosmetic procedures for people wanting to feel more confident in their own skin. Each case reinforced my belief that plastic surgery was real medicine, regardless of what my family thought. Have you ever experienced family rejection for following your dreams? Drop a comment below and let me know how you handled it. The financial pressure had eased slightly as revenue increased, though I was still operating on tight margins and reinvesting most profits back into equipment and facility improvements. The business loan payments were manageable, and I'd even started paying myself a modest salary. My relationship with my family had settled into a pattern of polite distance. Monthly dinners had become quarterly check-ins, and our conversations focused on safe topics like weather and current events. They asked about work in vague terms that avoided acknowledging what kind of work I actually did. "How's the practice going?" my mother asked during one of our rare phone conversations. "Well, thank you. We're staying busy." "That's nice, dear. Marcus just got promoted to senior resident. The department chair says he's one of the most promising young cardiologists they've seen." The comparison was always there, subtle but unmistakable. Marcus's achievements were celebrated while mine were politely acknowledged. But something interesting had started happening. Patients were beginning to specifically request me for complex cases. Dr. Rodriguez had referred a challenging reconstruction case that other surgeons had declined. Word was spreading in the medical community that my clinic delivered exceptional results. "Dr. Hayes, you have a call from Dr. Mitchell at Boston Presbyterian," my office manager, Sarah, announced. "He has a referral he'd like to discuss." Dr. Mitchell was the chief of plastic surgery at one of Boston's most prestigious hospitals. His referral call was both surprising and professionally significant. "Dr. Hayes, I've been hearing excellent things about your work," he said when I returned his call. "I have a patient who specifically requested you after seeing results from your reconstruction of Maria Santos's facial injuries." Maria Santos had been one of my most challenging cases. Extensive facial reconstruction following a severe car accident. The surgery had taken 8 hours and required multiple follow-up procedures, but the results had exceeded everyone's expectations. "I'd be happy to evaluate any patient you'd like to refer," I told Dr. Mitchell. "Excellent. I should mention that this patient is somewhat high profile. She's been interviewed by several surgeons, but she wants to work with you based on your reputation for natural-looking results." After hanging up, I sat in my office processing what had just happened. 6 months ago, my family had predicted my practice would be an embarrassing failure. Now I was receiving referrals from department chiefs at major hospitals. That evening, I drove past the neighborhood where I'd grown up, past the large colonial house where my family still gathered for Sunday dinners I was no longer invited to. The contrast between their traditional medical success and my independent path had never been clearer. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Dr. Hayes, this is Jennifer Walsh. You performed my breast reduction last month. I wanted you to know that 3 of my friends have asked for your contact information after seeing my results. Thank you for giving me my life back." Messages like Jennifer's had become regular occurrences. Patients who felt genuinely grateful not just for surgical skill, but for being listened to and treated with respect throughout their care experience. The next week brought a consultation that would change everything about how I viewed my practice's trajectory. "Dr. Hayes, I'm Catherine Morrison," the woman said as she settled into my consultation room. "I'm an entertainment lawyer, and I represent several actresses and public figures who are interested in very discreet cosmetic work." She explained that her clients valued privacy, natural results, and working with surgeons who understood the unique pressures of public appearance expectations. "We've been researching practices throughout New England, and your name consistently comes up as someone who delivers exceptional results without the ego or publicity-seeking behavior we sometimes encounter in this field." The referral potential from Catherine's client base could transform my practice from locally successful to regionally recognized. But more importantly, it represented validation that my approach to plastic surgery, respectful, skilled, focused on patient satisfaction rather than self-promotion, was setting me apart in the field. I'd be honored to work with your clients, I told her. Discretion and patient satisfaction are always my top priorities. After Catherine left, I called Sarah into my office. I think we need to start planning for expansion. We're going to need more appointment availability and possibly additional surgical time. Dr. Hayes, that's wonderful news. Should I start researching additional staff? Not yet, but soon. Let me think through the logistics of scaling up without compromising patient care quality. That night, I sat in my apartment looking at the consultation requests that had accumulated over the week. The practice I'd built without family support or established connections was succeeding beyond my most optimistic projections. I thought about calling my parents to share the good news, then decided against it. This success belonged to me and the people who'd supported me along the way. The family who'd predicted my failure didn't deserve to share in celebrating my success. 18 months into running my practice, something shifted. The steady growth I'd experienced suddenly accelerated into what I can only describe as explosive success. It started with Amanda Chen, a Broadway actress who'd quietly flown to Boston for a subtle nose refinement. Dr. Hayes, I cannot thank you enough, Amanda said during her final follow-up appointment. The result is exactly what I hoped for. Completely natural. No one can tell I've had work done, but I feel so much more confident. What I didn't expect was Amanda posting about her experience on social media. Not explicitly naming procedures or showing before and after photos, but simply expressing gratitude for feeling like the best version of myself and tagging my practice location. Within a week, my appointment book exploded. Dr. Hayes, we have a problem, Sarah announced on a Wednesday morning. We're booked solid for the next 3 months, and I've got a waiting list of over 40 people. The problem, if you could call record-breaking demand a problem, was that success in plastic surgery attracts more success. Amanda's discreet endorsement had reached her network of actresses, models, and entertainment industry professionals who valued both exceptional results and absolute discretion. I need a consultation with Dr. Hayes, became a phrase Sarah heard multiple times daily. Not a consultation or an appointment with someone, but specifically requesting me by name. Miranda Wells, a supermodel whose face graced magazine covers internationally, became my next high-profile client. She needed corrective work after a previous surgeon had overcorrected a minor imperfection, leaving her with subtle but noticeable asymmetry. 3 surgeons told me this couldn't be fixed without making it worse, Miranda explained during our consultation. But Amanda insisted you could help. The correction required precision that pushed my technical skills to their limits. The margin for error was essentially 0. Any mistake would be visible to millions of people who scrutinized Miranda's face professionally. 8 hours of surgery later, I'd successfully restored the natural symmetry without leaving any trace of the previous work or my own intervention. It's perfect, Miranda whispered when she saw the final results 6 weeks later. You gave me back my career. Word spread through elite circles faster than I could have imagined. Not through advertising or self-promotion, but through the kind of organic endorsement that money couldn't buy. Women who'd been disappointed by other surgeons, who'd been overcorrected or left with unnatural results, began seeking me out specifically. My reputation for creating results that looked natural rather than obviously surgical became my signature. In an industry where many surgeons seemed to stamp their work with recognizable styles, my goal was invisibility. Improvements so subtle and natural that people looked like enhanced versions of themselves, not like they'd had surgery. Dr. Hayes, Victoria Magazine wants to interview you for their Women Breaking Barriers issue, Sarah announced during one of our weekly staff meetings. The media attention was flattering, but secondary to the satisfaction of seeing patients' confidence transform. Each successful case reinforced my conviction that plastic surgery, done thoughtfully and skillfully, was absolutely legitimate medicine. And if my family could see the referrals coming from Harvard Medical School professors, Mass General Department chiefs, and internationally recognized surgeons seeking my expertise for their own complex cases, well, they probably still wouldn't admit they'd been wrong. Some people's opinions, I'd learned, were more about their egos than actual evidence. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was achieving exactly the kind of professional recognition they claimed to value, just in a field they'd decided wasn't worthy of the Hayes name. But their loss of bragging rights was my gain of authentic professional satisfaction. My practice wasn't just successful. It was becoming regionally famous for results that other surgeons struggled to replicate. 2 years after opening my practice, I sat in my enlarged office reviewing financial reports that still seemed surreal. The numbers weren't just good, they were extraordinary. Annual revenue, $8.2 million. Patient satisfaction scores, 98.7%. Referral rate, 89% of new patients came through word of mouth. Surgical complication rate, less than 1%, well below industry standards. Dr. Hayes, you have a call from Boston Magazine, Sarah announced through the intercom. They want to feature you in their Top 40 Under 40 issue. The media attention had become a regular occurrence. Medical journals requesting case studies, business publications profiling my rapid success, and industry conferences inviting me as a keynote speaker. The little practice my family had dismissed as an inevitable embarrassment was being recognized nationally as innovative and exceptionally well managed. I'd expanded into the adjacent suite, hired 2 additional nurses, brought on a full-time anesthesiologist, and installed equipment that rivaled what you'd find at major hospitals. The waiting list for consultations stretched 6 months out, and I'd started referring overflow cases to trusted colleagues because I refused to compromise quality for quantity. Your 2 o'clock is here, Sarah announced. Mrs. Davidson flew in from Miami specifically to see you. Mrs. Davidson was typical of my current patient base. Successful, well-researched, and willing to travel significant distances for results she couldn't get elsewhere. She'd been referred by another patient, who'd been referred by another patient, the kind of organic growth that advertising couldn't create. During the consultation, she explained that she'd consulted with 4 other surgeons, including 2 in Beverly Hills who were considered among the best in the country. But your before and after photos are different, she said, scrolling through my portfolio on her tablet. Your patients look like improved versions of themselves, not like different people entirely. That philosophy, enhancement rather than transformation, had become my practice's defining characteristic. While other surgeons seemed to follow trends or signature styles, I focused on understanding what would make each individual patient feel more confident while maintaining their natural beauty. The business success had brought financial freedom I'd never imagined possible during those early days of working 3 jobs and surviving on ramen noodles. I'd paid off my student loans, upgraded to a beautiful apartment overlooking the harbor, and established a substantial emergency fund that meant never again worrying about making rent. But more importantly, I'd proven something to myself about the value of trusting my own judgment over other people's expectations. My phone rang during lunch, a rare moment when I wasn't with patients or in surgery. Dr. Hayes? This is Dr. Patricia Morrison from the American Board of Plastic Surgery. We'd like to discuss your participation in our upcoming conference on innovative reconstruction techniques. Dr. Morrison was one of the most respected names in plastic surgery, someone whose textbooks I'd studied during residency. Her invitation to present at the national conference was both an honor and recognition that my work had gained attention at the highest levels of the profession. I'd be honored to participate, Dr. Morrison. Excellent. We're particularly interested in your approach to facial reconstruction cases. Your outcomes data is quite impressive. After hanging up, I allowed myself a moment of satisfaction that I rarely indulged. Professional recognition from peers who understood the complexity and skill required for what I did daily. That evening, I drove through my old neighborhood, not from nostalgia, but because it was the most direct route to my new apartment. Passing my parents' house, I noticed Marcus's BMW in the driveway, probably there for dinner, discussing his latest achievements while carefully avoiding any mention of my existence. The contrast between their deliberate ignorance of my success and the reality of what I'd accomplished was almost amusing. Almost. I'd built something that exceeded everyone's expectations except my own, using principles they'd taught me: hard work, dedication, excellence in patient care, just applied to a field they'd decided wasn't worthy of respect. Their loss, quite literally. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Dr. Hayes, I'm a journalist working on a story about successful female entrepreneurs in medicine. Would you be available for an interview? I'd gone from being the family embarrassment to being interviewed about entrepreneurial success in less than 3 years. Sometimes life had a sense of poetic justice that was deeply satisfying. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon, which was unusual because my mother typically called on weekends when she knew I was less likely to be with patients. Sienna, darling, how are you? Her voice carried a warmth I hadn't heard in years. I'm well, Mom. Busy with the practice. That's wonderful, dear. Actually, your father and I were hoping you might join us for dinner this Saturday. Nothing formal, just family. The invitation caught me off guard. Family dinners had been off the table since they'd made their feelings about my career clear through their group chat humiliation. Is there a special occasion? Can't parents simply want to spend time with their daughter? Her laugh sounded almost genuine. We've been thinking that perhaps we haven't been as supportive as we should have been during your transition period. As if my career choice had been a temporary phase rather than a deliberate professional decision. Saturday works for me, I said, curiosity overriding caution. The family home looked exactly the same as always when I arrived. Perfectly maintained colonial exterior, manicured landscaping, and the subtle displays of wealth that came from generations of medical success. But something felt different about this visit from the moment my father answered the door. "Sienna, you look wonderful," he said, embracing me warmly instead of his usual formal handshake. "Success agrees with you." Success. He'd actually used the word in reference to my work. Marcus was already seated in the living room, looking uncomfortable in a way I'd never seen before. Usually, family gatherings revolved around celebrating his latest achievements while politely ignoring mine. "How's the practice going?" he asked as I settled into my usual chair. "Very well. We're booked out several months in advance." "That's impressive," he said, and seemed to mean it. During dinner, the conversation focused on my work in ways that felt surreal after years of deliberate avoidance. They asked about patient types, surgical techniques, and business operations, with what appeared to be genuine interest. "I saw the article about you in Boston Magazine," my mother mentioned over dessert. "Very flattering piece. We were quite proud." Proud. Another word I hadn't heard applied to my career since I'd chosen plastic surgery. "Your mother has been telling everyone about your success," my father added. "The neighbors have been asking about your practice." The evening continued with praise, interest, and acknowledgement that felt too good to be true after years of dismissal and disappointment. They seemed genuinely impressed with what I'd accomplished, genuinely interested in my professional opinions, and genuinely happy to have me back in their lives. By the time coffee was served, I'd almost convinced myself that family reconciliation was possible, that maybe they'd finally recognize the legitimacy of plastic surgery and could accept my choices. "Actually, Sienna, there's something we wanted to discuss with you," my father said as my mother cleared the dessert plates. And there it was, the real reason for the dinner invitation. "Of course, Dad. What's on your mind?" He exchanged a meaningful look with my mother before continuing. "Well, you've clearly proven that plastic surgery can be quite lucrative, more so than we initially realized." The word choice was telling. Lucrative, not meaningful or valuable. "And we've been thinking," my mother continued, "about ways the family could work together professionally, pool our resources and expertise." Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his seat, avoiding eye contact. "What kind of collaboration did you have in mind?" I asked, though something in my stomach was already warning me about where this conversation was headed. "Well," my father said, settling back in his chair with the confidence of someone about to present an obviously brilliant proposal, "Marcus has decided to pursue additional training in plastic surgery. We've arranged for him to complete a fellowship program, and we thought it might benefit everyone if we could combine your established practice with his medical expertise and our business experience." The room went silent except for the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. I looked around the table at my family, the same people who'd humiliated me publicly for choosing this profession, and felt pieces clicking into place. They hadn't invited me to dinner because they'd finally accepted my career choice. They'd invited me because they wanted a piece of my success. I set down my coffee cup with deliberate care, buying myself a moment to process what I'd just heard. The family who'd predicted my inevitable failure now wanted to become my business partners. "Let me make sure I understand," I said slowly. "Marcus is switching to plastic surgery and you'd like to combine our practices?" "Exactly," my father said, his excitement apparent. "We've thought this through quite carefully. Marcus would bring credibility from his cardiology background. Your mother and I would handle the business operations, and you'd provide the established patient base." The audacity was breathtaking. They'd systematically undermined my choice to enter plastic surgery, refused to support my education or practice development, and publicly humiliated me for choosing this specialty. Now that success was undeniable, they wanted to claim ownership of it. "And how would this partnership be structured?" I asked. My mother leaned forward eagerly. "We've drafted a preliminary proposal. Marcus would receive 30% of the practice profits, you'd receive 30%, and your father and I would split the remaining 40% for management and oversight. 40%. For people who'd contributed nothing to building the practice they now wanted to control. The beauty of this arrangement," Marcus added, finally speaking up, "is that it would legitimize what you've built, give it the medical credibility it currently lacks." There it was. Even in their proposal to join my success, they still couldn't acknowledge that what I'd built was already legitimate. I looked around the table at these people who'd raised me, taught me the value of hard work and dedication, then completely abandoned those values when I applied them in ways they didn't approve of. "That's an interesting proposal," I said carefully. "We knew you'd see the potential," my father said, smiling with satisfaction. "Family working together, combining strengths, building something bigger than any of us could accomplish alone. But I have some questions about the structure." "Of course, dear," We're open to discussion. First, what specific medical expertise would Marcus bring to plastic surgery? His cardiology training doesn't really translate to cosmetic or reconstructive procedures. Marcus's jaw tightened. I'm a skilled surgeon. Technique transfers between specialties. To some degree, yes, but plastic surgery requires specific training in aesthetic principles, facial anatomy, and artistic sensibility that aren't covered in cardiology fellowships. Which is why Marcus will be completing a plastic surgery fellowship, my mother interjected. A fellowship program you're paying for? We're investing in the family business, my father said, and the management fee you'd receive. What specific business operations would that cover? I already have administrative staff, financial management, and marketing systems in place. The questions weren't hostile, just practical. But I could see my father's confidence wavering as he realized I wasn't immediately embracing their generous offer to take control of my practice. Sienna, we're offering to help you scale beyond what you could accomplish alone, my mother said. Our connections, our experience, our medical reputations. The same reputations that predicted my practice would be an embarrassing failure. The silence was sharp enough to cut. That was before we understood the potential, my father said carefully. You mean before you realized how much money was involved? Sienna, that's not fair, Marcus said. We're trying to help you build something sustainable. Something sustainable that would give you 30% of profits from a practice you didn't help build. With oversight from parents who couldn't even attend my opening ceremony, my mother's composure finally cracked. We made a mistake about the opening, Sienna. We're trying to make amends. By taking control of what I built without you, by offering to help you grow beyond current limitations, my father said, his voice hardening. This practice is successful, yes, but it's still just one woman working alone. We're offering family support, institutional backing, and professional credibility that would take you decades to build independently. There it was. The assumption that what I'd built alone wasn't enough, couldn't be enough, without their involvement and approval. I stood up from the table slowly, looking around at my family one final time. Thank you for dinner, I said quietly, and thank you for the proposal. But I'm not interested in sharing ownership of something I built specifically to prove I didn't need your support. Sienna, don't be stubborn about this, my mother said. Think about what's best for your future. I am thinking about my future, and it doesn't include business partnerships with people who wanted me to fail until failure became impossible to ignore. I walked toward the door without looking back. You'll regret this decision, my father called after me. You can't build something lasting without family support. I paused at the door and turned around one final time. Watch me. 6 months later, I stood in the lobby of the Westin Hotel downtown, adjusting my dress before entering the grand opening reception for Hayes Family Plastic Surgery. Yes, they'd actually used our family name for Marcus's practice, which was either the height of irony or the depth of delusion. The invitation had arrived 3 weeks earlier, formal and elegant, requesting my presence at a celebration of medical excellence and family tradition. I'd debated whether to attend, but curiosity won over dignity. I wanted to see what they'd built with the money they'd refused to invest in my education or practice. The space was impressive, I had to admit. Prime location in the medical district, marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and the kind of luxurious decor that screamed expense rather than taste. Everything designed to convey wealth and prestige rather than medical competence. Sienna, you came, my mother said, approaching with a champagne flute and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. How lovely to see you. Congratulations on the opening, I replied politely. This is quite an impressive space. Your father spared no expense. Only the best for Marcus's practice. Only the best. The same parents who'd refused to help finance my much more modest clinic had apparently opened their wallets completely for Marcus's venture into the field they'd once called embarrassing. Marcus appeared beside us, looking uncomfortable but trying to project confidence. Thanks for coming, Sienna. I know things have been complicated between us. Congratulations on your career change, I said. How are you finding plastic surgery? Challenging, but rewarding. Different from cardiology, obviously, but the surgical principles are similar. I nodded politely while internally wondering if he'd mentioned that surgical principles and aesthetic sensibility were entirely different skill sets. The reception was full of medical professionals, society figures, and potential patients who'd been attracted by the marketing campaign my parents had funded. I mingled politely, listened to conversations about the practice's state-of-the-art facilities, and observed Marcus trying to discuss procedures he'd clearly learned about recently, rather than mastered through experience. Dr. Sienna Hayes, a familiar voice said behind me. I didn't expect to see you here. I turned to find Dr. Rodriguez, my former mentor from the weekend clinic. Just paying my respects to family, I said quietly. Interesting career pivot for your brother. Though I have to say, patients have been asking me about the difference between your practice and this one. What kind of differences? Results? Mainly. You've built quite a reputation for natural-looking outcomes. People want to know if they can expect the same level of artistry from a cardiology-trained surgeon, regardless of how impressive his facilities are. The conversation was interrupted by my father taking the microphone for a toast. Thank you all for celebrating with us tonight, he began. Hayes Family Plastic Surgery represents the next evolution of our family's medical legacy, combining traditional surgical excellence with modern aesthetic medicine. Traditional surgical excellence. As if what I'd been doing for the past 3 years didn't qualify. Marcus brings years of cardiovascular surgical experience to plastic surgery, supported by the business acumen and medical connections our family has developed over decades. The implication was clear. Unlike some people who'd struck out on their own, Marcus had the backing to succeed properly. I slipped out during the applause, having seen enough of their celebration of everything I'd been denied when I needed it. 3 months later, my phone rang during lunch. Dr. Hayes, this is Janet Morrison. You performed my breast reduction last year. Of course, Janet. How are you feeling? Wonderful, thanks to you. But I'm calling about something else. My sister went to that new Hayes practice downtown for a rhinoplasty. I referred her because of our family name, thinking it might be related to you. My stomach sank. How did it go? Not well. The results look unnatural and she's having breathing problems. I wondered if you might be able to evaluate what went wrong. This was exactly what I'd feared when they decided to use the Hayes name. Marcus's inexperience would reflect on all of us. I'd be happy to see her for a consultation, I said. There's something else. She's not the only one. I've heard from 3 other women with similar problems after procedures at that clinic. Over the following weeks, I quietly treated 5 patients who'd received substandard care from my family's practice. Poor surgical technique, unrealistic promises, and results that required corrective surgery. I never told any of them about my relationship to the other Hayes practice. Professional ethics aside, their disappointment was punishment enough for my family's arrogance. The irony was perfect. They'd entered my field to capitalize on success they'd dismissed, then failed because they'd assumed surgical skill could be transferred without artistic understanding or respect for the specialty. Marcus had learned to cut and stitch, but he'd never learned to see, and their patients were paying the price for that distinction. The call came 18 months later, on a Tuesday morning that started like any other. Marcus's voice on the phone was different, smaller somehow, lacking the confidence that had always defined him. Sienna, we need to talk. What about Marcus? The practice. We're having some difficulties. Difficulties. Such a gentle word for what I'd been observing from the sidelines. Patient complaints, malpractice consultations, and a steady stream of revision cases seeking to correct Marcus's work. I'm sorry to hear that. We're closing the downtown location, moving to something smaller in the suburbs. The flagship practice they'd opened with such fanfare was shutting down after barely a year of operation. The marble floors and crystal chandeliers apparently couldn't compensate for surgical results that left patients dissatisfied and seeking corrective procedures elsewhere. We were wondering, Marcus continued, his voice barely audible, if you might consider some kind of collaboration, maybe referring overflow cases, or providing surgical consultation when needed. The irony was so perfect it almost made me laugh. The family who'd refused to support my education now wanted my professional expertise to salvage their failed venture. Marcus, I appreciate you reaching out, but I don't think that would be appropriate. Sienna, we made mistakes. We see that now. Dad and Mom realized they underestimated what you accomplished. Too little, too late. The recognition they were offering came only after their own failure made my success impossible to deny or diminish. I hope you're able to work through whatever challenges you're facing, I said diplomatically. Is there any way we could start over? As family? I looked out my office window at the busy street below, where patients were arriving for consultations, staff was preparing for surgeries, and life was continuing in the practice I'd built without their support or approval. Marcus, when I needed family support, you told me I'd regret my career choice. When I invited you to celebrate my opening, you publicly called it an inevitable failure. When I succeeded despite your predictions, you wanted to take control of what I'd built. We were wrong about everything. Yes, you were. But more importantly, you were willing to watch me fail, rather than admit you'd been wrong. The silence stretched between us until Marcus finally spoke again. So there's no chance for our family to reconcile? There was always a chance for reconciliation, Marcus, but it required acknowledging that I'd made valid choices and achieved legitimate success. Instead, you only reached out when you needed something from me. After hanging up, I sat in my office processing the conversation. The family who'd predicted my inevitable failure was now struggling with their own. The parents who'd refused to invest in my education had lost their investment in Marcus's practice. The brother who'd mocked my choices was asking for help from the sister he'd dismissed. I felt no satisfaction in their struggles, but I also felt no obligation to rescue them from consequences they'd created. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Your 2 p.m. consultation is here early. Also, Dr. Morrison from Harvard called about referring another complex reconstruction case. Professional recognition, financial success, and personal satisfaction had all come from staying true to my vision despite their opposition. The Hayes name they'd worried I would embarrass had become synonymous with excellence in plastic surgery, just not in the way they'd expected. I'd proven that success built on authentic passion and genuine skill would outlast success built on inherited advantages and family connections. That evening, I drove through my old neighborhood one final time, past the colonial house where Sunday dinners happened without me, past the practice location where they'd celebrated Marcus's entry into my field, past the privileged world where approval mattered more than achievement. My apartment overlooked the harbor now, filled with art I'd chosen, furniture I'd selected, and the quiet satisfaction of a life built entirely on my own terms. The family who'd rejected my dreams had never understood that their rejection had freed me to exceed those dreams completely. Sometimes the greatest gift people can give you is the motivation that comes from proving them wrong. And sometimes the most powerful revenge is building something so successful that their opinion becomes irrelevant. If this story resonated with you, make sure to like and subscribe for more incredible stories of people who turned family doubt into unstoppable success. Share your own experiences in the comments below. Have you ever had to choose between family approval and following your dreams? I'd love to hear your story.